Hello everyone, and welcome to the 7th overall chapter and the 5th content chapter of the lecture series through Dhamma 2.0, following in the footsteps of the Buddha. Today we talk a bit about the topic of virtue, or as I want to call it, true virtue, as the term is heavily misunderstood nowadays, and very few people actually practice the kind of virtue that the Buddha was talking about. My name is Dr. Florian Lau, and we will start with a short overview of this lecture. The first thing I want to discuss is the term wrong virtue, or what people typically understand when it comes to virtue. Then we have a short story time, talk a bit about the very early steps of virtue when it comes, for example, to lay people, namely charity and merit. And then we talk a bit about the precepts and the training rules that the Buddha mentioned as a very starting point for one who decided to take the spiritual journey a bit more serious, namely a monk, a renunciate. Then we talk about restraint and enduring, about practical approaches to restraint, or how that can look in a sitting style of meditation, so that you can make the meditation that you are used to a bit more right, because very few people are willing to let go of their meditation methods just like that. Then we talk a bit about noble communities, right effort, and also a bit about right attention, namely Yoniso Manasikara, and how all this ties together in virtue. Namely, virtue can be quite a powerful practice that can lead to the heavens for quite a long time, as the suttas mention, even up to 80,000 eons on end, without you having attained any kind of transcendental wisdom. Yet, you are still basically free from suffering for a very long time. But you are not ultimately free, as the very deep roots of self-view are still there. That is the only thing that you cannot really overcome as a person who has not heard the teachings from a Buddha, or as a person who became a self-enlightened being himself. But anyway, as always, I like to start with at least 5 minutes of restraint. You want to bring the mind into a state where the wild animal that your heart is does not pull in this or that direction, where it's basically content with the situation that it is in right now. You want to restrain its wild behavior, so that you can actually understand what is going on, so that you can actually see with wisdom. And this is very important. No matter what I say here, no matter where you pick up information, it has no place to land when there are still hindrances that are raging strongly in your heart. If this is the case, you must calm them first. Otherwise, any listening, any reading, any gathering of information will be pretty much in vain. As we say in Germany, it will enter one ear and it will go out the other ear right away. Anyway, I will pause now for a moment, and then you can do whatever is necessary to overcome the hindrances for now. Okay, I assume that you are done now, and now we start with the content of this chapter, namely with wrong virtue, or what people typically understand or misunderstand about virtue. And one of the bit sad topics is, or one of the bit sad facts is, that the topic of virtue and morality overall are extremely misunderstood. Now, this has several reasons, I would assume. It can be due to the fact that the teachings of the Buddha are now alive for more than 2,600 years, and there might have been errors that accumulated over time. Then there are religious backgrounds of various other religions that lead to preconceived notions and ideas about the topic of virtue. And the conventional Buddhist values are also mistaken when it comes to the comparison with the suttas. And if you want to define what virtue is, you could define it as good or wholesome, and the opposite would be bad or unwholesome. And wholesome or unwholesome are more or less defined as in line or conflicting with how things really are, thus leading you away or to, well, awakening. And virtue, or practicing virtue, emulates the principle of Dhamma on the surface level. And this is kind of important. Virtue concerns itself primarily with all your bodily and your verbal actions. So everything that other people can see when they observe you, this would be your virtue. But then there's also the action of the mind that you have to learn to see and restrain properly to make a breakthrough to the Dhamma. And very few people practice this kind of virtue rightly. They assume, very often, that virtue just concerns itself with the 5, the 8, the 10 precepts, and maybe even the rules for monks and nuns, but nothing more than that. Everything that is not explicitly stated in those rules, people will not deem as crucial when it comes to virtue. They completely miss the aspect that you actually want to learn about the intentionality. that you actually want to learn about craving. And this leads them away from the foundation of spirituality. And as a result, people usually never make any progress. They feel like they're making progress, but they are not making progress on the level that the Buddha was advising. And there's only really one case of actions, let's say it like that are always unwholesome, that are always leading you away from liberation. And this would be breaking the 5 precepts. There's no case of lying that you do not do out of intentional lying, that you do not do out of craving. There's no case of killing that you do not do out of craving, etc. And this is also very important to keep in mind. So those basic rules are designed to protect you from the worst kinds of behaviors that lead to a very bad outcome for you in the future. But anyway, more on that later, as we have an entire section about all the precepts and rules. Now to an example of what a wrong virtue can feel like or seem like. Things can seem wholesome from the outside, but are not. And one of the examples that I like to use quite often is that you can go, for example, to the library to read about the Dhamma or read about meditation, but you can do quite the unwholesome kind of procrastination there. You can read all kinds of steamy novels, distract yourself, or whatever. And this is not very wholesome, even though it looks kind of wholesome from the outside. But what matters is your intentionality. Why do you go there? And even if you go there to read about the Dhamma, but always end up reading something else, then it's not really wholesome, because you are kind of hiding your true intentions from yourself. Or you are willingly ignoring them, as you cannot really truly hide them from yourself, because they're always there. You know why you go to the library. But other people do not know. And everything that other people can see, well, that's what virtue applies, where virtue applies pretty much. Everything that you can say no to. Everything that you could avoid pretty much. I mean, you cannot avoid certain kinds of thoughts, as an example. They just appear in your mind. But you can choose not to go with certain kinds of impulses. That is very much within your domain. And another example would be lifting weights. It can be wholesome if you do it for the right reasons. If you do it to be fit for the striving, for the spiritual striving. If you do it to be healthy. If you do it to cultivate discipline and all kinds of other things, then it can be very good. But if you always have to go to the gym, where there are lots of other people that are half naked and full of vanity, then it's very likely that you will adapt to the surroundings and lift for very similar reasons. So it would be much better to lift in the, in a home gym, as an example, where no one can see you. If you just do it in such a setting, then it can be quite wholesome. But yeah, it can also be quite unwholesome. And the distinguishing factor would be the simple fact if there is any kind of wrong or unwholesome motivation in your mind. The reason why you do something, this is what truly matters. And even very wholesome seeming things, or commonly regarded as wholesome things like charity, can be beneficial and can be unbeneficial. If you are only engaging in charitable behavior or generous behaviors to mask, for example, tax fraud or to distract from certain other things that you have been doing, it's not so good anymore. But you can't see that from the outside. Your intentions are very personal and only you can see them. And your intentions determine your actions. Your value system determines your actions. What you desire on the level of your heart, this is what determines your actions. Or this determines the impulses that you could go for. But in the end, you can always say no to that. No matter what impulses the mind throws at you, you can always say, no, I don't want to do that. I will rein in the mind. I won't allow it to go that way. And wrong views, and this is very important, are like a maze or a spider web where you try to find the beginning or the end. You don't have to look for the very reason why you always go this way or that way, or what the fundamental point is where something went wrong when it comes to all the negative aspects in your life. All you have to do is make sure that you cultivate wholesome actions and decondition unwholesome actions. And as a result, the entire spiderweb, the entire fog, the mist, the muddiness of the mind will clear up over time. But for that to work, you obviously have to understand what wholesome and unwholesome even are, and have to eradicate a good number of wrong views from your experience. But that is technically a topic for a bit later, as virtue is, strictly speaking, not so much about views, but more about your behavior, your conduct, your actions, what you do with the body and what you speak with your mouth. There's an entire precept just about speaking, if you remember that. But again, more on that later. And just to illustrate what I mean here, when it comes to the deeply personal nature of virtue and your wrong views overall, every single person has a different starting position. In the beginning, we are very, very different. The more we practice on the path, the more our views, inclinations, and everything aligns, and the more we become similar to each other. But in the beginning, that is not the case. We start out in the middle of a maze of views, in the middle of a maze of our personal desires, of our personal intentionality. And each and every single one of us has to follow an individual route through this maze to escape it, to escape this samsaric maze, to escape this spiderweb, so to speak. And each one of us has a different maze, a different starting position. Some of us might have done a lot of work in a past life, so we are already very close to the exit of that maze and just have to turn left and right a few times, rightly, to escape it and make a breakthrough to the Dhamma. But before that, we do not really know when to go left, when to go right. We have to fully rely on the words of another person who has already escaped such a maze and is pretty much shouting from the outside, here, you have to go this way, that way, you have to turn left or right, or whatever. But in the end, you have to find out for yourself. Am I distracted by the promises of a hidden treasure inside of this maze? And thus, my actions are motivated by that. Or am I trying to escape it? Am I following actions of non-greed, non-aversion, non-delusion? Or am I following actions of greed, aversion, and delusion that takes me deeper into the maze and makes it even harder to escape? This is a very important distinction, and only you can know that. And your purified conduct is what's leading you very close to the exit of this kind of maze. And there's also a lot of wrong virtue when it comes to meditation itself. This also applies to what people conventionally see as very wholesome things, as meditative things. And many teachers nowadays are even saying that you cannot have such a thing as a wrong meditation or something like that. And I very strongly disagree with that. There are loads even. Most kinds of meditation are very wrong. At least if you do it for the purpose of liberating yourself from suffering, of liberating yourself from samsara. There are people who practice meditation to win debates, to be famous teachers, to be well known around the world, to be wealthy, to be highly regarded by other people, to be praised by lots of people. There are people who do it out of vanity, people who want to just increase productivity. I mean, on the worldly level, those are all fine reasons, and means if that's your goal, then go for it. But when it comes to liberation from suffering, this won't lead you closer to the goal. An unwholesome, false meditation, thus, is very possible. And unwholesome in this context just means that it is leading you away from liberation. That does not mean that it has no benefits. That does not mean that such meditation techniques cannot calm you. They very much can. They can feel incredible. But that does not mean that they are getting you closer to liberation. The liberation that the Buddha was talking about, the liberation from your chitta, the liberation of your chitta, is a liberation from feelings. Feelings no longer matter in your experience. This is where you want to go. So if you cultivate meditation to feel good all the time, how are you getting closer to the goal of no longer being touched by any kind of feeling, of feeling detached, as the Buddha says many times over and over in the suttas, that is a distinguishing characteristic of a noble one. And the Buddha called all those kinds of meditation either over-meditation, under-meditation, or simply mis-meditation, sometimes meditation with a partner. In any case, all those kinds of meditation are wrong, as they are performed with lust, hatred, or delusion, and not with non-lust, non-hatred, and non-delusion. And again, you can also translate delusion as distraction. It is just the urge to do anything at all when you are confronted with a neutral kind of feeling. And all things that are motivated, very important, that are motivated by lust, hate, or delusion are bad. The motivation, your inclination, why you do something, the reason, that is the important part. The Dhamma practice is a practice of purifying your intentionality, cultivating the right ones, deconditioning the wrong ones. Even things like being a vegan can and often are done for the wrong reasons. I mean, pretty much all the monks that I know, at least from the Theravada tradition, are eating whatever is presented to them. They are not vegans. And they even have to quite frequently lecture people about not sticking to certain kinds of food ideologies when they come to visit the monastery. They decide it's not fit for monks to eat this or that kind of food. And then they try to prevent the monks from eating that or something like that. This is your craving and not the craving of the monks. And it's very important to avoid it, to see the motivation behind those actions, and then to purify them. People love to avoid the real problems and try to go for something more direct. As an example, there was a sect of, competing wanderers, the Jains, that were something like militant vegans at that time. They were against the killing of any kind of animal and made it a prerequisite for the purification of the heart, for the purification of the mind, for the purification of the chitta. And the Buddha frequently showed them how misguided they were. The non-eating of meat, as an example, will not purify your heart. It has no impact on your intentionality. And as there is no impact on the intentionality, no impact on what you desire, it has no real impact on the suffering, and thus it cannot liberate you. And in the end, if an act is wholesome or unwholesome, can change by the minute, as it is determined by the presence of craving. Usually it does not change so much, because you value chocolate deeply, as an example, or value going on holidays weekly. Many people are addicted to traveling, as an example. They deeply value going on vacation. Their entire life revolves around that. And again, it's fine if that is your goal. But if your goal is liberation, then it's not fine. Then it will not lead you in that direction. And you can, for example, move to another country or go to another country or another place for good reasons, and you can do it for bad reasons. So there's no simple rule that the Buddha could describe to tell them, yeah, traveling is also bad, always bad. No, that's simply not the case. If you do it for the wrong reasons, that's bad. If you do it for the right reasons, it's good. But again, it is decided by your intentions. And virtue, the true kind of virtue, includes the working and understanding this kind of intentionality. If you do not understand that and just practice according to the precepts, then you have a very hard time, because the precepts allow for lots of wiggle room, lots of actions that are still motivated by greed, aversion, and delusion. And if you just go by that and are not honest with yourself, then you will not make any true progress. Our greed and aversion and everything else will just re-establish in a new place. And this is very important. And the right view on virtue is as follows. Training in virtue boils down to non-craving, at least on the bodily and verbal level, but also a bit, in my opinion, on the mental level. It is about learning to resist your unwholesome impulses. And impulses are not simply wanting or distracting. You want to really make sure that you only allow the mind to go for the right things. You don't want to prohibit everything. If you train, for example, a wild animal like a dog or something like that, and you always whack it with a stick, no matter what it does, then it cannot learn anything. You have to really be careful when you reward it and when you whack it with a stick to punish it. If you always punish it, then it cannot learn anything. And the same is true for your heart. You want to discipline it, you want to tame it, you want to make sure that it learns for itself that certain kinds of behaviors are dangerous and that it should never go there again. And this requires us to have some understanding of wholesome and unwholesome. And the goal of the entire training is that you cultivate a certain kind of equanimity, a certain kind of mental non-interaction with all those phenomena. You want to be able to, and I like to go in this order, because you are usually already affected by your impulses, you want to be able to let them go. Once you are okay with letting them move away, that requires a certain degree of activity, by the way, then you can let them be or let them endure in the mind. And in the end, you can just let them come, in the sense that you are just as established as you are right now. There's no much surface level hindrances or craving present. And as such, you are not affected even if those things arise. They then arise with the right kind of implication. They arise without the emotional kind of significance that can draw you in. And virtue overall emulates the principle of the Dhamma, the principle of non-craving, the principle of non-self. And there is no Dhamma without virtue, but Dhamma alone begins with stream entry. So everything that you do before that is getting the mind ready to understand the Dhamma. Basically, you remove all the suffering from your life by practicing virtue, by removing all those actions that give rise to remorse later. As a result, you will experience blamelessness, or non-remorse, as it is sometimes called in the suttas. And this place of non-suffering is where you can understand how to never go back to suffering. But this requires you to be free from suffering in the first place. And meditation methods can be very deceiving when it comes to that, because oftentimes they have no element of intentionality involved. And if they have certain elements of intentionality involved, then it is often the case that you practice this kind of restraint, where you try to cultivate an equanimous mind just to jump in on the next good emotion that arises, or the next good bodily feeling that arises, or something like that. And in the end, you end up cultivating tingly feelings in the forearms, or sensations of warmth, or something like that. But how will sensations of warmth, or tingly feelings, or vibrations liberate you from suffering, if suffering is caused by craving, and craving is something that is deeply personal and deeply intentional? and overcoming desire by desire is necessary. You have to work with your desires as your experience arises, corrupted and poisoned by desire. So you start with desire and have to work with desire to ultimately overcome desire. Some desires are good, some desires are bad. Desires of non-greed, non-aversion, and non-delusion are good, and everything else is pretty much bad. And you must learn the difference for yourself. And this is very important, because again, it is deeply personal. The more you progress, the more people align, the more they become like each other, even in the practice. But there are still some remaining differences. Some people are more inclined towards concentration, others are more inclined towards ascetic practices, etc. So there are still some differences remaining. But overall, the levels of craving go down. And as the levels of craving go down, we do not go for all those actions we previously went for. So the diversity of actions are greatly diminished, because in the end, we are just content with sitting around doing nothing. And that always looks kind of similar. Maybe you go on some kind of spiritual mind journey or something like that, if you are inclined that way. But apart from that, you're perfectly fine just sitting around. And this is the most blissful state. Okay, but let us now come to story time number 5. And now we talk a bit about the first very important disciples. Between the first and the second rain retreats, the following happened. The chief disciples of the Buddha, Sariputta and Moggallana, were still monks under another monk called Sanjaya. And excuse me if I butcher those names, I'm very bad at spelling Pali. And both of them, Sariputta and Moggallana, had a pact that they would inform the other should they ever find the deathless. And at some point, Sariputta, as the Buddha called him sometimes the general of the Dhamma, encountered Asaji and attained stream entry after just listening to 4 lines of his. And Asaji pretty much said the following: the perfect one has told the cause of causally arisen things and what brings their cessation to. Such is a doctrine praised by the great monk, as he was called at that time. And this short statement includes the teachings on dependent origination. Otherwise, they would not have the capacity to liberate anyone. The point here is, even though Sariputta has just heard a very short statement, he was able to understand that because he has already done the taming of the mind. He already has made sure that the surface level defilements, the hindrances, are not present. And as such, the weakness of wisdom, as the Buddha calls them, were not there. And based on such a pure and thoroughly established mind, he was even concentrated, quite concentrated even. It was not the right kind of concentration. As such, he was able to understand it very quickly. And then Sariputta went to Moggallana, and Moggallana realized the peaceful faculties of Sariputta, because there's only one thing can happen when you understand the Dhamma, namely that it is only accompanied by great joy, great peace. And Sariputta repeated the same statement to Moggallana, and he too attained the vision of the Dhamma. He too attained stream entry. He too made a breakthrough to the Dhamma. The lame names of both were, by the way, Upatissa and Kulita, and both went to the Buddha with the 250 followers. And the old teacher, Sanjaya, puked hot blood and died on the spot, unable to give us his attachment to fame, because he was very attached to being a great teacher and everything, and having people who studied under them. Sadly, he had not sufficiently good karma to also go to the Buddha and to also become liberated. And the Buddha saw those 2 people, namely Upatissa and Kulita at that time, in the distance and announced them as their chief disciples. After only 7 days, Mahamoggallana, the great Moggallana, attained the deathless. And Sariputta had very high ambitions, and it took him 14 days to attain final liberation. And the Buddha did praise him, Sariputta, as a general of the Dhamma. Any monk, any practitioner can only hope to be his equal, but never be better than him, or more accomplished when it comes to the Dhamma. And after a relatively short time, Ananda, the person who followed the Buddha around and remembered all his teachings, I'm not sure what's it called in English. In Germany, it's called Aufwärter, his personal servant, pretty much, also joined them and attained stream entry quickly. And there was also a monk called Devadatta, who gained ordination and pretty much only got the supernatural powers at that time. He had a concentrated mind, but he was still full of wrong views. And later on, he would become one of the main antagonists of the Buddha. And at some point, he even wanted to kill him and drew the blood of the Tathagata. But as it is said by the Buddha, it is impossible that the Buddha dies an unnatural death. He cannot be killed. Okay, but let us now talk in the respective order about the successive steps that you can go through when you try to cultivate virtue as a very beginner. The first step is charity and merit. The idea of merit is that you, or generosity, is that you want to make good karma, essentially, do good actions with the body and do good actions with the mouth, so that you are rewarded in the future. This is a widespread idea in Buddhist countries like Burma, Thailand, and all the others, where Buddhism is still the major religion of the world. And yeah, the merit that you generate is pretty much the culmination of beneficial past choices. And towards monks, it is often practiced as dana. And dana just means that you give food or certain items that are necessary for monks, like robes or medication. And as a result, you create quite good karma. The main benefit of dana, by the way, is that you can hear and encounter the teachings of the Buddha. This was one of the main reasons why the Buddha listed dana, or giving to monks, as something very beneficial. Because now, or in times where the teachings were mainly transmitted verbally by monks that were visiting and begging for alms or something like that, those were the main cause for encountering the teachings. It is nothing mystical. It is just cause and effect. If you perform lots of actions of non-greed, non-aversion, and non-delusion, then you become more established in a mindset of non-greed, non-aversion, and non-delusion. And giving gifts or being a generous person requires that. And the greatest benefit that you could ever encounter is the encountering of the Dhamma. If you are interested in Dhamma, you have quite good merit on average, because you are only interested on a deep level in renunciation if you have performed quite a bit of renunciation before, or if you have encountered the limits of non-renunciation through, for example, a divine messenger event. And one of the main roles, again, of giving to monks is to encounter the good Dhamma. But for that, you have to obviously give to the right kind of monk. If you give to wrong ascetics, then you cannot really expect the same results as the Buddha mentioned. Again, it's still good to give. There's nothing wrong with that. But it's not necessarily wholesome to give. Wholesome in the sense of leading you to the end of suffering. And since this is the goal of this lecture, as in assisting you with that task, you should be very careful to whom you listen. And the classical benefits that the Buddha mentioned when it comes to giving are, you will be liked by others and are welcome everywhere. People will like you, and people will enjoy your presence. And nice and good people, people who are similar to you, will be drawn towards you. And we talk about a bit about that later when we talk about noble communities. So this is just pretty much a natural rule. People gather according to the elements. Further, people who give a lot have a good reputation and fame. So if you are interested in fame and reputation, which is one of the 8 worldly dhammas pretty much, then that is something that you should do. And you can pretty much look around everywhere in the world. Those people who are very highly regarded are usually people like Warren Buffett or Bill Gates. Sure, they also have haters, but they give a lot. They have pledged their entire wealth pretty much to a good cause. And as such, they have a very good reputation and quite a bit of fame, at least when it comes to most people. And then, fourth, a generous person possesses inner confidence and has no problem with, for example, public speaking. Because if you have no remorse, if you know by heart that what you do is good and right, as in motivated by non-craving, what is there that could shake you? You have no remorse. Your behavior is blameless, and as such, you cannot experience those kinds of suffering, which is a very severe kind of suffering, of remorse, of blameful behaviors, of things and acts that create suffering. You cannot experience the kind of suffering that is related to that. And as such, a vast amount of suffering has been lifted from you, by simply not engaging in those kinds of behaviors that cultivate this kind of suffering. And the more negative you think about others, the more you expect others to do the same. And the last point that the Buddha mentioned is that a generous person has a good rebirth. And even at his time, people had to go by faith when it comes to that one. But as the Buddha was telling people so many truths that they could verify for themselves, they were willing to go by faith when it comes to the last one. So those are the 5 benefits. I think number 5 is not really a benefit. It is something that I have added. And I should probably have added it as a subpoint. And then there are some other benefits. Additional benefits are that giving gifts is only really possible or based on weak attachment and weak craving. And it further weakens craving. So by performing actions of renunciation, your value system, your internal compass of what is good and right, will be further aligned with the right direction. Further, craving comes as a package. If you crave material things less, then you also, by carryover, weaken your wrong views and all the other kinds of craving. Your lust will diminish when you give gifts to others. Your hatred will diminish if you give gifts to others. Because all those things are based on the very same principle, namely the principle of craving. And wrong views are the most unwholesome thing. They are even worse than killing. Even worse than killing your parents. The Buddha literally mentioned wrong views, holding wrong views. That's literally the most unwholesome thing in existence. So it is good to let go of those, but it's very difficult to let go of views. Before you can do that, you have to purify your conduct quite severely. So your actions have to be very pure for you to even notice that you are holding views, and even notice that it is possible to let go, perform a mental action of non-clinging, of non-attachment. And if you give food or other things to monks, you are more willing to listen to the Dhamma. Because in the Western mindset, if we pay for something, then we expect something in return. So we are more willing to listen. Many people only really buy a gym membership, as an example, because it incentivizes them to go there. They could buy a home gym, as an example. But I hear it quite often that people simply pay for something so that they are forced to go there. It's a motivating factor for them. And giving up things or clinging to things creates ease, and fewer negative states of mind can arise. So this is mainly what we try to go for. We want to tame the animal, the heart, like that, by showing it that non-craving is better, that this is a state that we should cultivate. But this requires a lot of training, as a mind that we are paired with has been greedy for a very long time, and as such it's very difficult to let go of that. And giving is only virtue if you do it freely. Stealing from others to do good is actually bad. And this is something people cannot really wrap their head around. The moral value of stealing is much worse than whatever good you do. And even Ajahn Chah said that. I was recently in a monastery and there was a cup sitting on the cupboard and it stated, and I think it was attributed to Ajahn Chah, not doing evil is even more important than doing good. And this is very, very true, and one of the central paradigms of Buddhism. You have to mainly undo your wrong kinds of conduct. Whatever remains will be good conduct, but you don't actively have to cultivate good conduct so much. There will be something that replaces the bad conduct, and that's fine, because you initially, at least, you have to fill your time with something, and that's good and right. But anyway, let us continue. I also want to give you a gradual example. So if you never practiced any kind of virtue, and never did anything like that, you can, of course, start with whatever you are capable of, like giving away money. That's also fine. But if you are a cheap person who is a bit stingy, you can, for example, give compliments to others. Not lie to them, but say something nice without expecting anything in return. People rarely use the opportunity to do that. You can give your time by volunteering. Again, that does not cost anything, but it can be very fruitful, because even people who give lots of money are usually not willing to work in a soup kitchen or something, which is a very good experience, by the way. People should do that more often. People should dedicate their time towards others. As in, they renounce their own time, the pleasure that they could have during those activities, in favor of something that does not really generate pleasure, at least at first. Maybe later. Maybe there is some pleasure of having done something good, which gives people a warm feeling. And that warm feeling is a much better pleasure than anything that is related to drinking or partying or anything like that. You could buy pirated digital goods that you have watched for free, pretty much, which is something most people do and do not consider stealing, even though it is. You can invest a bit more effort into holiday gifts. You could give to charity, which is also great, by the way. You can give to good monasteries, as an example, where you feel like they are practicing the good Dhamma. And even if they are not, if your intentions of giving money to others are pure, that is still good. It's maybe only a gift that is once purified, namely by your intentions, and not purified by the receiver, but it's still good. And giving dana to monks, which is pretty much the best thing that you can do, is nigh impossible not to be good. Again, there are people who abuse the ochre robes, and you should, if you have some degree of judgment developed already, be careful not to give to them, and rather give to people who are practicing the good Dhamma. But apart from that, even if you give to them, it is still an act of generosity, and it still requires a lot of non-craving to do so. And it also cultivates non-craving. but it's very likely that you pick up some of the wrong views of the persons that you give to, and as such, there is always a downside to giving to the wrong kind of person. Okay, but, and I want to be very, very careful here, because many people from more Eastern countries are very interested in making merit, because they deeply value sensuality. When it comes to the greatest kinds of merit, the Buddha said the following: even more fruitful householder than the great alms offering that the Brahman Velma gave, and feeding 1 Sotapanna, and feeding 100 Sotapannas, and feeding 1 once returner, and feeding 100 once returners, and feeding 1 non-returner, and feeding 100 non-returners, and feeding 1 arahant, and feeding 100 arahants, and feeding 1 Pachika Buddha, and feeding 100 Pachika Buddhas, and feeding the Tathagata, the arahant, the perfectly enlightened one, and feeding the Sangha of Bhikkhus, headed by the Buddha, and building a dwelling dedicated to the Sangha of the 4 quarters, and for one with a mind of confidence, to go for refuge to the Buddha Dhamma Sangha, and for one with a mind of confidence, to undertake the 5 rules, training rules, and for one to develop a mind of loving kindness, even for the time it takes to pull a cow's udder, would it be to develop the perception of impermanence, just for the time of a finger snap. All those things mentioned before, none of that comes even close to the development of the perception of impermanence, as in to a breakthrough to the Dhamma, even for the time of a finger snap. This is from the Anguttara Nikaya, Book of the Ninth, number 20, in case you want to read it up. All those things mentioned before are gradually more meritorious. You require less and less craving to do any of that. If you are a very rich person, as an example, Bill Gates-like wealth or something like that, or Warren Buffett kind of wealth, it does not harm you in the slightest to give a large piece of property to the Buddha and his followers. And you would generate lots of merit by it. But taking the 5 precepts seriously generates much more merit. And generating and cultivating a mind of loving kindness would generate much more merit. And the ultimate merit is making a breakthrough to the Dhamma. If you want to generate true merit, then you should practice the Dhamma. Then you should practice what the Buddha laid out. And you should follow the Noble Eightfold Path. This is the ultimate kind of merit, the ultimate kind of generosity that you can do. Removing your own evil from the world, which is much more important than doing something good, as Ajahn Chah mentioned. And I very much stand by that and very much agree with him when it comes to that. But let us now come to the precepts and the training rules, which the Buddha defined as a starting point of the training, for example, for monks and nuns. Okay, and here is a citation from the suttas that I mentioned. It's about the training order. And the Buddha pretty much said at some point, so when the Tathagata, the Buddha, obtains a person to be tamed, he first disciplines him thus: come, monk, be virtuous, restrained with the restraint of the Patimokkha, be perfect in conduct and resort, and seeing danger in the slightest fault, train by undertaking the training precepts. This is from Majjhima Nikaya number 107. And in the beginning, you have simply no internal judgment of what is good and bad. To you, at that point, it seems like everything that feels good is good and everything that feels bad is bad. This is the moral judgment of a worldling, of a person who has not yet understood the Dhamma. So we have to go by faith. We have to go by confidence. We sometimes have to go by sufficient worldly wisdom and understanding that what the Buddha said has to lead to those results. Or we go by the motivation of already having developed some kind of samadhi. And then we practice additionally, restrain the mind further and further until it has really dried off sensuality. And it really is a bit like purifying gold. As the Buddha mentioned, monks, there are gross defilements of gold, like soil, grit, and gravel. And then the first person, this is the thing that you do first, is that you are like a soil remover or his apprentice. You wash, rinse, and cleanse it, and remove the gross defilement of the mind, like very lustful behaviors, like raping people, stealing, killing, all those things. And once those have been sufficiently deconditioned, you start by removing, or you continue by removing the middle gross defilement of the mind, like fine grit and coarse scent. Those are like telling lies, maybe, or drinking all the time, or engaging in gambling addictions, or playing video games all the time. And once you also have deconditioned those and maybe have replaced them by better habits like lifting weights for the right reasons or eating healthier, don't overeat all the time, and such things, then you can continue with finer defilements like sand and black dust. And only once all those defilements have been removed, once your behavior and your speech have been thoroughly purified, can you start by smelting the gold? Then you remove the dross. It continues, the process continues on ever finer levels. And so too, monks, gross defilements of bodily, verbal, and mental misconduct, sensual thoughts, thoughts of ill will and thoughts of harming, thoughts about his relation, thoughts about his country, and thoughts about his reputation. And then, when all those things, very subtle things, by the way, and very subtle views even, have been removed, there comes a time when his mind becomes internally steady, composed, unified, and concentrated. And one thing that I also want to mention is that the Buddha does not really mention any kind of meditation technique here. Just by the removal of all those harmful qualities, harmful views, and harmful behaviors, your mind will become composed, unified, and concentrated at all times. But more on that in the next lecture. Okay, so in essence, you want to emulate the principle of Dhamma. You have no idea what the Dhamma actually is at that point, because the understanding of what the Dhamma is comes with stream entry. This is when it culminates. Before that, you can get a good understanding of certain unwholesome kinds of actions and certain wholesome kinds of actions. But in essence, you are like a child emulating their parents without understanding. A new trainee simply does not know right is right and wrong is wrong. That is the understanding of a Sotapanna. He knows right is right and wrong is wrong. So you have to imitate the noble ones in body and speech to progress further, thus acting and speaking in line with the principle of Dhamma, the principle of non-craving. And this is first achieved by training rules and precepts. Those protect you from suffering. You undo your suffering by that, because suffering is something that you do, that you fuel and maintain through your actions. Every unwholesome action will lead, for example, to remorse. And remorse will be accompanied by lots of suffering. And this works without any transcendental understanding at that point. Your work is to clarify your view of what is wholesome, what is unwholesome, and then align your actions of body and speech with that. This is absolutely necessary. I have given you the simile of shaking the snow globe before. But when you still engage in those unwholesome kinds of behaviors, and in this unwholesome kind of speech, then you are constantly shaking the snow globe and cannot see the Dhamma that is inside. This is necessary. Even some degree of samadhi, which is not yet Samma Samadhi, by the way, is necessary for a breakthrough to the Dhamma, but it is not it. You still have to make sure that you cannot re-engage with all the suffering, with all the negative qualities, because they can come back. This is what people don't understand nowadays. You can cultivate your samadhi to a degree that you are free for a very long time. Even during, and by the way, with this kind of samadhi, I do not mean this afterglow that people mention when it comes to sitting meditation. It is just a thorough establishment of the mind that is there at all times. And if you really cultivate it like that, a lifestyle without craving, even then it can come back. So you have to be very careful about understanding the Dhamma. And based on that, the things that protect you the most are the 5 precepts. Those are literally the strongest kinds of manifestations of craving. You need a lot of craving for that. You need a lot of lust, for example, to go through the internal resistance towards killing. Because killing is not something that we do just like that. Just like stealing. It's not something that comes natural. It requires going against certain kinds of impulses that we have cultivated. So it's very important to keep in mind that those kinds of behaviors produce very bad results, lots of remorse. The same is true for engaging. Sorry, I'm getting sick, by the way, so I have to record it now. Otherwise, I cannot really record it in the future, likely, because my voice will be gone. But we will see. Maybe I can avoid it. You also want to not engage in sexual or sensual misconduct. For the sake of easiness, let's keep it to sexual misconduct, like cheating. And you do not want to engage in false speech, like lying, slandering, and idle chatter. This one is a bit controversial, but whenever the Buddha was asked to describe what false speech is, he listed lots of things. And if you really, truly stick to this kind of precept, then you will be silent most of the time. There will be a bit of cordial talk when you talk to other people, but apart from that, you only speak with a purpose. And that purpose should be the purpose of renunciation, the purpose of understanding the Dhamma a bit more. So you either talk about Dhamma, or if you are working in a lay setting, you sometimes also have to small talk with people, but it can be on good topics. And you should not be trying to prolong the conversations unnecessarily. So you should avoid excessive speech, as an example. You should not take any kind of substances that lead to heedlessness. Again, when I say drugs, people will rationalize that certain kinds of substances are not considered drugs, and they will take it anyway. But anything that alters with your state of mind and makes it more likely that you engage in unwholesome kinds of behaviors, when you dull down the mind, when you make it overly agitated, when you make it overly joyful, or anything like that, it's very likely that your choices, your actions will be bad and fuel your suffering further. So you want to avoid all kinds of substances that lead to this kind of wrong conduct. This should be very simple, but as we are not very honest with ourselves usually, and our mind is lying to us most of the time, we want to be careful to take this precept very seriously. And by taking the 5 precepts seriously on all those different levels that I have mentioned, people usually make quite rapid progress. This is something that people usually ignore because they think that precepts are just something that I do on the side. And they don't even look for all the rationalizations that they do. And again, even if you take the precepts very seriously, there's still a lot of wiggle room, and you can still find lots of things that are very unwholesome that you can still do. Thus, we want to take our restraint a step further, and very serious practitioners can also take the additional 3 precepts, which is basically not engaging in false speech like before, not killing, not stealing, and not doing any kind of sexual misconduct, not taking drugs, and then, this is quite unnice for most people, practice celibacy, as in no sexuality of any kind, practice moderation in eating, and then practice non-distraction, as in no dancing, no music, no shows, theater shows, no flowers, no makeup, no wearing of ornaments, no decorations, basically moderation in sensuality. You do not want to distract yourself from the Dhamma. And in doing so, pretty much your entire time, when you take the 8 precepts, circles and revolves around the Dhamma and nothing else, at least if you take it to the extreme. And this is a kind of practice that will lead you straight to jhana, because you abandon sensuality like that. Because all of that, all those things that distract you, are usually lustful kind of things. Those are sensual kinds of things. And essentially, you practice the 5 precepts plus moderation and sensuality. And this kind of also includes high-end luxurious beds and all those things. I think I have missed them here in the list, but they are part of that. Those are the ethical rules. And beyond the 8 precepts, monks usually also practice the 10 precepts, which is basically the 8 precepts plus no money. And there's a 4-month testing period, or was a 4-month testing period in the early days. And the restraint of the Padimokkha is also something that monks additionally do. So they do not just practice those sloppy rules that have lots of loopholes. They follow a much stricter set of rules. And every uposatha, those precepts and rules have to be repeated and recited by the monastic community. So on the full moon, on the new moon, and on the half moon. Again, this uposatha is nothing mystical. It's just a very good opportunity to pay back your sensual debt. So if you notice you engage a lot, but force yourself to withdraw, to be on withdrawal for some time, then you are always forced to experience the downside of your engagement quite frequently and cannot really engage too hard. Otherwise, you would have to experience the negative side of that quite frequently, and that is not something that people are usually willing to do. And this reveals your addictions and shows the benefits of renunciation. And those precepts and training rules should be kept with a forever mindset, without excuses. So what you essentially want to do, when I say forever mindset, it essentially means that you want to realign your internal value system. You want to start considering the precepts as something good, as something that protects you. You want to value renunciation more than you want to value sensuality. This is where you want to go. Ultimately, you have to erode away the value of sensuality. You have to see it as empty. You have to see through it for a breakthrough to the Dhamma. Because what you essentially do is make a breakthrough to non-sensuality, a breakthrough to renunciation, a breakthrough to letting go of the world. And without removing the upadana, the fuel of sensuality that keeps you in samsara, it is nigh impossible to do that. So people need something that shows them how futile and how useless the engagement in sensuality truly is. And then we have the vinaya, and I've been told I mispronounce the words vinaya and vijnana quite a lot, and I'm sorry for that. But in my mind, They sound basically identical, and I have no idea why, so I tend to mix them up from time to time. So the vinaya and the padimokkha are also very important when it comes to monks and nuns, and for the sake of completeness, I also want to repeat it here. It is the code of conduct for monks and nuns, and it consists of the Sutta Vibhanga, the Mahavagga, the Kulavagga, and later also the Parivara. I'm not sure which monastery sticks to what set of rules, but essentially there are like 227 rules for monks and nuns, and a bit more than 300 rules for nuns specifically. And they concern themselves with things that harm the community and are forbidden. The Buddha only really gave us new rules when someone misbehaved in a big way. And this includes rules that sound quite useless at times, and he even allowed us to abandon those minor things, like not taking garlic or something, because some monk or nun in the past took too much garlic and was too greedy when it comes to that. And you won't believe what the Buddha had to deal with at his time. The amount of detail when it comes to the origin stories of certain rules is outright terrifying when it comes to the kind of sexual misconduct that was practiced at that days. It includes all kinds of atrocities. But mostly those rules focus on sexuality, stealing, killing, and lying and deceiving in various different ways. They focus on restraining your kind of greedy, hateful, and distracting behaviors as best as possible. Because the more of the very advanced people were already liberated, the newcomers were not as prepared for this kind of practice. They were not willing to renounce as much. So the Buddha had to increase the restraint for them by giving them lots of external rules that they had to abide by so that their minds would calm down. But in summary, it's all based on not acting out of great aversion or delusion on the level of body, speech, and also the mind to a very severe degree. But there we are more bordering the level of samadhi. You want to permanently renounce those actions. You want to understand that it is truly bad, and that you want to train the mind to a degree where it immediately shies away from any of those actions. For example, when you walk around in your daily life, and there comes a thought in your mind. Someone, maybe a roommate or something, did something very stupid. And then the mind goes, really some bad behavior of his. And then you immediately recognize that you are just right now creating suffering for yourself. And like a pan that has been heated all day, as is mentioned in the suttas, and a few drops of evil, a few drops of water are sprinkled on that pan, they will immediately evaporate. The mind is not willing to go there. It's not willing to get enraged. It's not willing to get angry. It's not willing to conjure up some ill will. Why? Because it has realized that it is harmful. But this realization takes a lot of taming and training and practice. Yeah, in the end, there's really nothing new on this earth, and past generations were just as bad as this generation is. This generation might be a bit worse when it comes to the access to sensuality, but the inclinations have always been the same. If you do not allow people to have sexuality, then they will find a way around that. And if you read those books that I've mentioned before, then you will encounter quite some heavy stuff. Let's put it like that. Okay, and let us now come to the restraint and enduring part. Those are also technically part of the practice of virtue. Both sense restraint and enduring feelings, so to speak. Sense restraint is pulling the mind back from sensual experiences, where it wants to go. And enduring is more related to your feelings. You want to not perform certain replacement actions when you feel bad or neutral or when you feel good. And those are essential for the practice. The goal of this kind of practice is a certain kind of emotional non-reactivity and to restrain you from unwholesome kinds of behaviors. As in, you want to decondition your suffering, because every bit of unwholesome action that you perform leads to your suffering. So when you suffer, you can be quite certain that you perform unwholesome actions. It cannot be any other way. This is very necessary for wisdom to arise. For insights, you have to be unabsorbed while good, bad, or neutral feelings are present. So when you are not restrained, you have no chance of understanding the Dhamma, because the Dhamma is not really there for you at that moment, because you distract yourself through your actions from it. And non-restraint means that you kind of immediately and kind of automatically give in to your impulses of getting rid of certain situations. You give in to averse impulses. And this prevents calm seeing, because you look away, you cope, you distract yourself. And if you look away from what you try to understand, you cannot understand it. It's absolutely impossible. And restraint does reveal the addictions that you have created for yourself, and it will also create some kind of withdrawal symptoms, at least initially. And without it, without restraint, you will not even see the problem of sensuality. You have to truly interrupt your routines. You have to truly interrupt all the coping mechanisms and addictions that you have cultivated throughout your life. And you have to place the blame correctly. You experience withdrawal symptoms not because you are not taking your drug. You are experiencing withdrawal symptoms because you have been taking your drug for such a long time and have accumulated so much sensual debt, as the suttas sometimes put it. And when you take that away from the mind, it suddenly feels like it is paired with the disagreeable and no longer paired with the agreeable, and this creates suffering. This is why greed, aversion, and delusion are very much the source of your suffering. And this is kind of automatic. This is our starting position. We always reacted as far as we can think back, and most thoughts, words, and deeds happen like that. There's an emotional impulse, and we immediately act out of it, not really noticing it even. We rarely choose to disrupt the upholding of such routines. We automatically want agreeable things. I mean, you can try to not want to like sunflowers or not having your favorite color to be blue or something like that. But it will not work. This is not a matter of choosing, it's a matter of training, if anything. Yeah. People, flowers, meals, all those things have a pull on us. They enchant us. They intoxicate us even. Initially, we have no say in this process of liking and disliking, so we have to tame the mind. We have to tame the chitta to achieve that. The mind has a mind on its own. It's a sensory organ. It wants its things, and the Buddha did compare it with a wild animal, with a wild dog, a wild elephant for a reason. And the elephant one is quite popular because the elephant is much stronger than you, yet you still can tame it. You still can train the elephant, but you have to be smart about it. Otherwise, the elephant will drag you to territories where you do not want to go. So we can control this process, at least to some degree. And you can look at the entire thing from an evolutionary perspective. Even though this model has to be taken with a grain of sand, that does not mean that every bit of science or evolution does apply to the Dhamma. And I would be very careful when it comes to applying that too generously. I'm a science person myself, so I know the impulse to do that and explain everything with the models that we use, but they are not very suitable when it comes to practicing the Dhamma. Yet, the evolution model offers a very good explanation for wanting good feelings and emotions. It can be seen as an evolutionary relic, because it's a very fast mechanism for making choices that are beneficial, or at least seem beneficial, for survival. Emotions and feelings are very fundamental, and they are more fundamental than thoughts. Feelings pressure us to behave in certain ways, and this is very useful in dangerous environments, as an example. But in a modern environment, they frequently malfunction. Things have changed quite quickly in the last few thousands of years, and whatever biological programming we had from our ancestors are likely not too beneficial right now. So we should think twice if we should cultivate certain kinds of behaviors, because choices based on feelings are not always, I would even say rarely, a good idea. So yeah, but again, this is just a simile to illustrate what I wanted to say. But now to a short experiment. Try sitting for like 20 minutes in the middle of your room without moving. And I can, as a very beginner at least, I can offer you quite a bit of money if you want to do it. And as a very beginner, do you think you can do that, even with such a big reward in your mind? Well, if you are well meditated, so to speak, you might be able to pull it off. But the vast majority of people are completely incapable of doing so. Their minds will come up with all kinds of rationalizations, and why we have actively stopped early, trying to hide the fact that emotions and feelings pressure us so strongly that we always act in line with those. Once the feelings change, our behavior changes, and our mind hates the idea of being controlled. It likes to ignore that whenever possible. So our feelings really have a strong pressure on us, and it's very important to acknowledge that. We are not the master of our feelings, we are slaves to our feelings, and have to train the mind away from that. And this is very important, because as long as we are slaves to our emotions, there's no spiritual progress to be made. If we are passionate, so to speak, about our feelings, then we cannot really cultivate this passion in regards to our feelings. Those things are usually mutually exclusive. And this is just another way of looking at this. What we can see here is lots of agreeable things. Again, this is very subjective, by the way, on top of the dotted line. And then there are a lot of disagreeable things below the dotted line. And usually, by default, we are pulled toward those things at the top, and we are averse to those things at the bottom. We are averse to catastrophes, to old age, to sickness, to death, and to all those things, and probably many other things like dogs barking and useless stuff that we really have no good justification to be averse towards. And then whenever certain tense experiences arise, like YouTube videos or Instagram stories or pictures, music, Facebook, I don't know, alcohol, tasty food, most of us love eating tasty food all the time. And when we are hungry, we basically have nothing else on our mind. Yet we are always pulled towards those things. And we take those impulses to be ours. We take those impulses to be what we want anyway. But in essence, there's always a feeling first. There's first a feeling of lack. And then there's the experience of a cake, or there are images of a cake that you see, and suddenly you want the cake. There are situations where you like cake, and then there are situations where you do not like cake. It's not in the cake, it's in your attitude. This is the gist of it. You want to learn to tell the difference. You want to learn when some experience, some action of yours is motivated by craving, and when it's not. Again, what's the difference between eating a cake after eating 10 other cakes and eating the first cake? I mean, the cake is still the same as before, and we have done that experiment in the past, so you should already understand the gist of it. In essence, we want to understand our chitta, our heart mind, so to speak, the mind that experiences emotionally as a wild animal. And the Buddha pretty much said the following. Suppose a man would catch 6 animals with different domains and different feeding grounds and tie them by a strong rope. He would catch a snake, a crocodile, a bird, a dog, a jackal, and a monkey and tie each by a strong rope. Then those 6 animals with different domains and different feeding grounds would pull in different directions onto their own feeding grounds and domains. They would be dominated by the one among them that was strongest. When a monk has not developed and cultivated mindfulness directed to the body, the eye pulls in the direction of agreeable forms, and disagreeable forms are repulsive. The ear, the nose, the tongue, the body, the mind, they all pull in the direction of agreeable phenomena of their respective domains. This is from the Samyutta Nikaya, number 35.247. So as you can see, our desires, the strength of our desires, is like an ordered list. There's always a strongest desire. And if the eye's desire to see some beautiful form is strongest right now, then it will pull there, and it will dominate all the other animals. So at that point, the only thing that will seem important to you is seeing nice imagery. I have to see this or that person, or whatever. It doesn't really matter. The point is, the heart is really like an untrained animal. And whatever sense experience presents itself, the heart will want to go where the pull is strongest. We want to avoid bad feelings, we want to seek out good feelings, and we want to distract ourselves from boredom. In essence, we are like a puppet. Other people can abuse your reactivity and manipulate you here and there. In essence, if you are in a direct conversation with another person, they have more control over your emotions than you have. They can something that you strongly dislike, and you have no choice but to dislike it and get angry at that person. And clickbait, for example, in videos works like that. It abuses your emotions. It creates experiences that you fear or like, so that you click the video and watch it and get all railed up. And people can create those feelings much better for you than you can that. And you have no say in the process. You are completely controlled by those emotions that change on their own. And this is an age-old concept of divide and conquer. Those who control your feelings control you. So the media, the government, your enemies, or whatever, you are wide open for control through them. So if you want to not give them this kind of control, then you should cultivate emotional non-reactivity, or in essence, you should cultivate virtue. Okay. Yet, restraint, even though the Buddha praised it a lot and said that it is the foundation and the cause of peacefulness and joy, is unpleasant at first. Because restraining craving reveals the pain of sensuality that you have done before. It reveals the sensual depth that I have mentioned. People usually blame the restraint, even though the sensuality that you have engaged in before is to blame for the withdrawal symptoms that you experience now. So you have taken up debt, and now you have to experience that it feels bad having debt. And sensuality is like bashing your head against a wall to enjoy the moment the pain stops. Yet there is some reward in it, otherwise we would not do it. And this leads always to stronger pressure, stronger craving, and more pain in the future. You take up more and more debt to pay back the old one, but in the end you get only more indebted. But most of this is too indirect for the vast majority of people, so they blame the lack of chocolate for their bad feelings right now, and not the fact that they have eaten way too much chocolate before. And happiness is only possible with restrained senses. And this applies to worldly happiness too. People who want chocolate all the time are very unhappy. If you never have cultivated a chocolate addiction or an addiction to sweet things overall, then you would be happy all the time, even if you did not practice a Dhamma. And happiness is more or less the sublime peace of not being pressured. And everyone, literally every person, every chitta, wants peace, but they are bad and unskillful at going about it. They only know one way to achieve that peace, and that is giving into sensuality. If there's a pressure that makes you to go towards chocolate, then the only way you know how to make that pressure go away is to go for that chocolate. There's no other way known to that people. So they go for it. Unless they have learned the Dhamma, for example, from the Buddha or one who has learned it from them. And practically speaking, there are lots of ways where you can that you can go about to restrain the mind. Especially in the beginning, there's a vast, it's very diverse, let's put it like that. And one way the Buddha talked about this is the elephant taming simile. And it pretty much goes as follows. The elephant tamer plants a large post in the ooze and binds the forest elephant, the wild elephant that represents your mind, to it by the neck in order to subdue its forest habits, its unwholesome habits, and to inculcate in him habits congenial to human beings. Then the elephant tamer addresses the elephant with gentle words and praises him, makes him listen. And when the forest elephant is addressed by such words, he listened and exerts his mind to understand. The elephant tamer next rewards him with good food, good fodder and water. And then the elephant tamer trains him further thus. Take up, put down, go forward. He essentially gives him tasks so that he starts to listen. The elephant tamer trains him further in the task called imperturbability. So a man with a lance in his hand sits on his neck. A man with lances in their hand surround him on all sides. And the elephant tamer himself stands in front of him holding a long lance pole. Yet the elephant does not move. The king's elephant is able to endure blows of spears, blows of swords, blows from arrows, blows from other beings, and the thundering sounds of drums, kettle drums, trumpets, and tom-toms. Being rid of all faults and defects, purged of flaws, he is worthy of the king, and the king's service considered one of the factors of kingship. And this is from Majjhima Nikaya number 125, and this describes the gradual training process that we go through when we tame the mind. Initially, we have to apply an arbitrary kind of restraint. We literally tie the mind to a post, using our mindfulness, our restraint, and everything. We use the precepts, the padimokkha that the Buddha gave us, to restrain the mind and keep it in a healthy domain, to undo the forest habits, the unwholesome habits that we have cultivated. And only once those are gone, we can start working a bit more with rewards and slight punishments, give the mind more and more tasks. And only in the very end, once we have thoroughly removed craving from our entire life, will the task called the imperturbable be on the table, which is another word for jhana or for sammasamadhi, where you train the mind to a degree where even pain, as an example, even being struck by spears, axes, swords, and such things cannot make the mind move anymore. But this is a culmination of the practice and not something that you just do initially. Formally speaking, on the meditation cushion, such a practice can look as follows. You take a posture and set a time. No in-meditation adjustments if you can do. I can do that. You endure all the itches, you endure all the pains, you endure the discomfort. You endure heat and cold, and all those things obviously within reason. And then you endure thoughts of doubt, hate and lust, gradually towards more finer things. You endure bad feelings. Enduring now makes you better at future enduring. You decondition, you pay back your sensual debt like that, so that you are no longer swayed by your emotions the way you have been swayed before. Non-enduring makes you worse. There is no middle ground. You either move forward or you move backwards. And you go against the grain, against the natural inclination of the mind. This is painful initially, but necessary. and if you do it for quite a long while, your mind will notice that it is better that way. And in everyday life, you pretty much do the entire same thing. You want to cultivate a lifestyle of non-craving. You want to align all the actions that you do with your body and that you do with your mouth with the principle of Dhamma. As in, you want to remove the craving from all those things. And this could include practices like fasting, instant gratification detoxes, occasional retreats in a group if you are very early in your practice, or later solo retreats that are very beneficial, or in a monastic setting where you have lots of time for practice on your own. This could include exercise, like lifting. This could include dieting, or moderation in eating, moderation in sensuality overall. Even work should be something that is included. It's all sense restraint. Working especially. Most people dislike work a lot, but those who like work a bit too much should focus on working less. Both is possible. In the end, it is always about craving. You have to check what things you do in everyday life, and then identify those where there's very likely craving involved, and then check a bit more. Is there really craving? If there is craving, restrain it, endure it, etc. And rinse and repeat until you have thoroughly cleansed all the craving or sufficiently much craving from your experience. You could always enjoy yourself during those activities that I mentioned before, but you choose not to. You renounce the need for feeling good. Enduring often makes things effortless. Your entire life becomes effortless if you don't want things all the time. It's like cultivating any other skill. You become good at it by doing a lot of it. And whatever we do most frequently will become our natural mode of being. But this does not yet include the transcendental wisdom, even if we have thoroughly deconditioned all the unwholesome things from our life. Yet, you want to gradually move yourself away from what you deem agreeable on the level of your heart. And there's plenty of work to do, because there's always, at least for a person who just starts, lots of craving involved in everything. The agreeable in the end does stay, but what you want to remove is the craving. And one of the very important practices is moderation in eating, because eating is a very tricky bit of action, let's put it like that, because it's not optional. You have to eat certain things. Yet, most of us are very addicted to eating, and thus it's especially bad as a habit, as an addiction, because you cannot just go cold turkey. And the Buddha named it explicitly, while other things were summarized under sensuality. And he advised many monks to have only one meal for a day, or at least only eat before noon. And this is how monks live most of the time. And he praised them in that for the health benefits and the energy and the alertness that you experience when you eat less. And most people nowadays should eat less. That's also something that we should keep in mind. Again, there are also noteworthy examples of people who should eat more because they have cultivated an addiction to eating nothing, pretty much, to looking good, or very thin at least. Yet this is good for lay people too. As we often say on the Dhamma Hub, for example, server, the practice of monastics and lay people is the same. So they, the monks, have to get rid of all their desires, and we, the lay people, also have to get rid of all of our desires. It is just that the monks have dedicated their entire life towards that. The lay people can do that too, by the way, but it's just a different setting then. And also there was another motivation of fewer injuries, of monks not going on alms route too late, because there were some accidents in the past, as far as I remember. Anyway, virtue is about gradually renouncing your prior lifestyle. You transform your entire life, all the actions that you do, forever. The goal is to relinquish or renounce everything unwholesome, every action that is unwholesome, and not just pause them for a few hours on the meditation cushion and then go right back to it. You want to influence your internal value system. You want to notice that those kinds of actions are actually bad and not worth going for. Okay, and now we come to the last few segments of noble communities. I had no idea where to put it else, so I put it here because I find it very important. The Buddha mentioned in a few suttas the following. Now, on that occasion, not far from the Blessed One, the Venerable Sariputta, Mahamoggallana, and Mahakassapa, as well as the Venerable Anuruddha, were walking back and forth with a number of monks. The Buddha said, "Monks, do you see Sariputta walking back and forth with a number of monks? All those monks are of great wisdom. Do you see Moggallana? All those monks have great spiritual power. Do you see Kassapa? All those monks are proponents of ascetic practices. Monks, it is by the way of element that beings come together and unite. Those of an inferior disposition come together and unite with those of an inferior disposition. Those of a good disposition come together and unite with those of a good disposition. In the past, they did so. In the future, they will do so. And now, at the present, they do so too. And this is from Samyutta Nikaya number 14.15. And what the Buddha essentially says here is that the people that you surround yourself with will influence first what you will become in the future, and your personal inclination will also influence where you will go. In essence, you adapt to your surroundings. And I like to call that the two social laws, the laws of social attraction and adaptation. And those laws pretty much describe how human interaction works. We unite and form groups with people who are a bit like us, and we become more like each other in the process, because we constantly adapt to the behaviors of the group. All social beings are subject to that. We are roughly the sum of the 5 people we spend the most time with, both in good and bad behaviors, so we have to choose our friends wisely. And the same is true for monks. This is why we gather in sanghas of like-minded people, so we can encourage each other in our practice, and we adapt to those people who are better than us. This is why the Buddha said that we should seek out people who are at least our equal in the practice. And if you find a noble one, you should try to keep around him, even if he sends you away. I think those were the words that the Buddha chose in the suttas. And there's a citation from the Ihibutaka. Even if you do no evil, but seek out one who does, you are suspected of evil. Your bad reputation grows. The sort of person you make a friend, the sort you seek out, that's the sort you yourself become. For your living together is of that sort. Your social surroundings, your physical surroundings, will influence how you will become in the future. And the same is true for the physical surroundings. The Buddha even said that life in a forest is to be preferred to life in a village. Because even if your mind is very unruly, if you go to the forest, it will calm down. If you instead go to the city, then it will agitate even more. So your surroundings have a very major influence, and you should choose them wisely. You should not spend too much time in crowded places. And in the end, all of this kind of practice, all the practice of virtue, will lead to the right kind of attention. And you can observe those social laws from very early childhood onward. The famous intellectual Thomas Sowell realized that the amount of parental attention and family background or family history predicts success much better than your intelligence quotient or your IQ. And there was a famous study involving, I think, 1,500 children of IQ 140 or higher. So they were all very intelligent. And that study yielded the result that it is not the attention itself, or that first it officially yielded that the amount of parental attention and family background are much better predictors than IQ. But I deduced or inferred from that it is not the intention itself. It is because those people who give you the attention correct your wrong and unwholesome kinds of behaviors. And they correct your wrong attention. Those people who are much older and wiser than you, at least at that time, are all knowing oracles that know what's much better for you because they have learned it themselves. So if we imitate good people, we become good. If we imitate bad people, we become bad. Humans work like that. Behaviors are what make people good or bad, is what the Buddha said. The monk is considered a monk because he does monk things. The priest is considered a priest because he's doing priest things. The warrior is considered a warrior because he does warrior things. We are considered to be this or that because of our actions. And this is very important. It's not because of our birth, the color of our skin, our sex, or whatever. Those things should be meaningless. And our modern society should be much less focused on all those birth qualities and much more focused on the kinds of behaviors that we display. This is one of the major flaws of our time, that we are regressing towards this kind of racial mindset where we attribute all the good and bad that is happening in the world to birth qualities, to birth marks, like the sex, the gender, the color of the skin, or whatever. Stupid things. Okay, but anyway. Now one more slide on noble friends. The Buddha called noble friends supremely beneficial, not because it's so good to have friendship or anything like that, but for their effects. He called them the entire spiritual life, because they enable it. If you have a noble friend, as in a friend that has at least attained the right view, then it's very likely that you can attain the right view too, because that friend can enable you to do that. They further provide accountability, inspiration, knowledge, and show that this very difficult theming task of renunciation, of practicing the Noble Eightfold Path, is indeed possible. You place trust in them, and they are someone that you can emulate. And I think in the suttas they are called Kalyana Mittas. And this is often taken as an excuse for bantering and chatting, even by monks nowadays, who just value friendship and not noble friendship, and ignore everything else when it comes to the suttas, and just say, yeah, friendship is great, you have to have good friends. Yeah, you kind of have to have friends who have a straight view and who practice well, and not any kind of friend. In the end, you want to avoid excessive work, talk, and sleep, as those are very big hindrances even for monks. Okay, and then we have sanghas. Those are very likely a bit more accessible than noble friends, because large groups of people that gather somewhere, even online, are much more likely to contain one or two noble individuals than random people you meet on the street. They provide a group accountability, they are a store of knowledge, and they are the reason why the Dhamma is still alive today. They provide a very good environment for beginners, and traditionally, very advanced monks in sanghas and groups of people did all the work so that the beginners could train themselves. And in the end, seclusion and social group settings must be balanced. The Buddha did praise discussion and interrogation, all 3, 5, or 14 days, at numerous times in the suttas, but he also praised seclusion quite a bit. Yet, there are occasions where the Buddha said things like, what have those venerable monks gained by spending all their time in the forest? No noble distinction worthy of the noble ones, or something like that. So you have to be careful. You have to choose your environments and your actions in accordance with what yields good results, with what leads to progress. And this usually requires some discussion, some interrogation, some straightening of your views, and a lot of purification of your conduct. But once you have understood the Dhamma, once you made a breakthrough to the Dhamma, being alone is usually very beneficial. But even then, discussion with others can be beneficial from time to time. Even arahants met 1 or 2 evenings in the week to discuss the Dhamma. There's no harm in that. It's even very beneficial most of the time. And from the Dhammapada, there's certain citations. If you gain a noble companion, a fellow traveler, right-lived, enlightened, overcoming all dangers, go with him, gratified, mindful. If you don't gain a noble companion, a fellow traveler, right-living, enlightened, go alone like a king renouncing his kingdom, like the Tusker elephant in the Matanga wilds, his herd. Going alone is better. There's no companionship with a fool. Go alone, doing no evil, at peace like the elephant in the Matanga wilds. Those are from verses 328 to 330. And this is a very important message. You should not seek out friends just for the sake of having friends and companions. If you can't find a noble individual, just go alone and practice on your own. This is much better than spending time with people who are inferior, and sorry for using the word inferior, who are not practicing the good Dhamma. This is much better than just spending time with people for the sake of having company. That's not good. Okay, now a bit on right effort. Because we have to do the right things, as mentioned before. You want to fix your conduct. And one of the citations I like very much is when the Buddha taught his son Rahula. Rahula, when you wish to do an action with the body, you should reflect upon that same bodily action thus. Would this action that I wish to do with the body lead to my own affliction, or to the affliction of others, or to the affliction of both? Is it, thus, an unwholesome bodily action, with painful consequences, with painful results? When you reflect, if you know, very important, you know, this action that I wish to do with the body should lead to my own affliction, or to the affliction of others, or to the affliction of both, it is an unwholesome bodily action with painful consequences, with painful results, then you should definitely not do such an action with the body. But when you reflect, and you know, very important, you know, this action that I wish to do with the body should not lead to my own affliction, or to the affliction of others, or to the affliction of both. It is a wholesome bodily action with pleasant consequences, with pleasant results. Then you may do such an action with the body. And then, by the way, this is from Majjhima Nikaya number 61. And then the Buddha repeated the same statement for the verbal actions, and for the mental actions, and for past actions, for future actions, for present actions, for all possible kinds of actions. All of those have to be purified in the same way. You should reflect before, after, while, with body, with speech, with mind. And if you do this thoroughly, then there can only be one goal, namely the gathering of the mind and samadhi. If you then also have access to the good kinds of teachings, then a breakthrough to the Dhamma is imminent. And then there are the four kinds of right execution that you also find mentioned in various Buddhist texts. The more you know wholesome and unwholesome, the more you can train yourself as follows. But very important, most often this is a kind of aspirational practice. You want to align your behavior, your conduct with what is wholesome and good, and train it away from what is unwholesome and bad. So you want to generate desire, endeavors, activate your persistence, and uphold your effort with the intent for preventing unwholesome states of mind from arising, abandoning already present unwholesome states, cultivating future wholesome states, and maintaining already present wholesome states of mind. The problem is, we can only do that for things where we are quite sure that those are either wholesome or unwholesome. But the full understanding of wholesome and unwholesome only really comes once you attain the Dhamma, once you attain stream entry, once you attain the right view. Only then can you fully decide. Before that, you can do that in some cases, but not in all. But it's still very good to do that. But only Sotapannas or further progressed individuals can train like that fully. For them, those statements fully apply. Yet it is still very beneficial to make an aspirational effort and really try to prevent unwholesome states of mind from arising, even though you have no idea how to do that. This preventing of arising, that is a true work of the Dhamma. And especially that one is very difficult to do. Okay. But let us now continue. There are possible dangers. People nowadays love to leave out virtue. The Western mindset is one of progress, wanting to skip ahead, wanting shortcuts, wanting the good stuff right now. And this results in a lot of instability and reactivity. Insights are near impossible without virtue. They can be disruptive with little virtue. Virtue is what dampens your fall. It's the best protection against the withdrawal symptoms from stopping sensuality. And the deeper down the sensuality rabbit hole you are, the worse it gets. It can feel like a supremely big loss because you remove the only coping mechanisms that you have. And the deeper you went on that coping, the more you feel like losing, even though ultimately it's not worth anything. The order of the path has a reason. You don't want to leave out virtue, as that will lead to a lot of problems in the future. Do not leave out the essential steps. Most of the time, the order of the training is there for a reason, except for certain numbered elements. In the suttas, as an example, the 4 foundations of mindfulness have not to be practiced in that order. This is a memory aid. But the order in which the Buddha spoke certain suttas, not the numbered elements, that matters, usually. First, he talks about virtue and gladdening the mind and all those things. And only later does he talk about concentration as an example. Yet, people get it all upside down most of the time. But anyway, let us now come to the most important points of this chapter 5. First, virtue is a greatly overlooked and greatly misunderstood, yet absolutely essential part of the practice. There's no Dhamma without virtue, but virtue alone is not yet Dhamma. Virtue starts with keeping precepts, sense restraint, for monks also the rules of monks and nuns, the vinaya, and enduring. And then it progresses by renouncing the world gradually, by completely transforming your entire life away from a life of craving towards a lifestyle of non-craving that will look radically different. Seeking out noble friends and learning from them by emulation will greatly assist you in that process. When you can, spend time with noble individuals because you will automatically adapt to their behaviors. You want to purify your conduct in body, speech, and mind. That is a goal, and it is a foundation for insight. And adapting to people who already are away from sensuality, away from greed, aversion, and delusion in body, speech, and mind, will speed up their progress tremendously. Virtue is a bit like walking the Noble Eightfold Path without knowing to do so. It unsuffers you. It removes the fuel of suffering from your life. And when there is no more suffering, then you can realize, oh, there is no suffering. And this is what I have been doing so that the suffering is gone. And then the teachings on dependent origination that prevent suffering from re-arising in the future, that prevents you from re-engaging with suffering, now they can apply. Once you have calmed the snow globe, once the waters are no longer muddy, then there's a fertile ground for you understanding the Dhamma. But only then. Without virtue, it's absolutely impossible. And if you have a wrong understanding of virtue, then it also won't happen, which is very important. Virtue allows us to gain insight into bad feelings, into craving, or into any other scheme of dependent origination. The Buddha phrased dependent origination in many different ways. And if we understand any one of those, then we have pretty much made a breakthrough to the Dhamma. If we immediately remove cravings by giving in to actions of sensuality, then we can never understand how painful it is and how we ourselves are creating our own suffering. And this understanding of how we create our own suffering is not even noble. This is part of the mundane right view on virtue that unsuffers you. Again, you can free yourself from suffering for thousands, if not 100,000 eons on end. But in the end, it will come back. And the Dhamma is only there to prevent this coming back. But only. This is a major task. But anyway, this should be about it for today. If you want to, you can perform this meditation of the day. Again, all those meditations of the day are designed to gradually ease you off your meditation techniques. In and of themselves, they are not very beneficial. I just want to present a few ways that you can use to make your meditation techniques that many people are still adhering to a bit more right, a bit more focused on your intentionality, a bit more like practicing true virtue. If you wish, you can do that. Practicing metta can be very good even, apart from that. But yeah, if there are any questions, feel free to put them in the comments below. We will likely answer them either in the comments directly or in one future Q&A video with, for example, Saif. Right now he's a bit on a hiatus, taking a bit of a detox from social media, if I remember correctly. But at some point in the future, we will very likely come back to your questions. Yeah, as always, here's a contact slide. You can follow all those links if you are interested. But apart from that, thank you for listening. If you enjoy what we do here, feel free to share those videos, like them, watch the other videos of the playlist, or maybe even join the Dhamma Hub Discord server. But until then, I wish you a pleasant day and goodbye.